by my early 20s, I was probably a full-fledged anti-Soviet element who didn't believe anything. And part of that was, of course, that we started having access to information about life outside the Soviet Union. At some point, I think the Communist Party had lost its leverage over Soviet people in the 60s with the Khrushchevian so-called thaw, which was necessary for political reasons to thaw out the country after Stalinist freeze and terror and so forth. But that also meant that people started coming from the outside world. One of the first steps that Khrushchev undertook was International Festival of Youth in 1957, when suddenly foreigners from all kinds of capitalist countries and started coming into the Soviet Union, and it was a huge event because nobody had seen foreigners before, live Americans or live people from Africa, So
did you go to that event? Did you go to that event?
No, that was when I was very little.
Oh, okay.
That was, but then 60s were that people started coming. They started appearing foreign tourists, which were like as foreign as creatures from Mars, just more or less. It just was strange to look at people and think that they were just, they were born and lived someplace else. They were dressed differently. They spoke a language. It was kind of bizarre that they chose to speak not Russian because it's so natural to speak Russian. Why did they have to bother learning any other language?
What was your first encounter with somebody like that?
Well, I don't quite remember. Being in Leningrad, which is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, of course, and the cultural center of Russia, Soviet Union. There were always foreigners there in downtown area because it's just it's sort of, just architectural, museum under the open sky. And there have always been foreigners there just coming from nearby, maybe on a tour of Scandinavia that's a very short, leap from Helsinki or Stockholm by cruise ship or something like that. But I lived since the age of 8 on the outskirts of the city, where there, of course, were no foreigners. Like not any. Just you live in the suburbs of Winnipeg, you probably won't see many Russians coming there. But on occasions that my parents would take me downtown on the Nevsky Prospect and so forth, or we would go with our elementary school class teacher would take us to the Hermitage, which is the second largest museum in the world, and we would periodically see them, foreigners who would immediately stand out. They would dress differently. They just looked differently, and so we saw them all the time. Every time you were downtown there. So I don't remember. It's a different matter when I first spoke with one, and that was much, 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 much later. I corresponded with somebody from Poland because in middle and high school we were encouraged to develop correspondence through the Club of International Friendship with our peers from socialist countries only, obviously not from United States or UK or France or anything,
Right. But
from Poland, from GDR, which was German Democratic Republic, which was East Germany, or Bulgaria. There they were studying Russian there, so they were practicing their Russian, and we just so I remember our class it was all organized activity. So I corresponded briefly with some girl from Poland, but that kind of petered out fairly quickly. Then I think I really spoke with a real foreigner, maybe when I was like 18 or 19. And that was the summer in college when I worked as a train person. Because in the summer in the Soviet Union, as a college student, you had to be engaged in some kind of publicly useful activity, labor. So either, doing some agricultural stuff, just outside of the cities, and I did that also, this student construction brigades. But one summer, I worked as a trainman, conductor, basically. It was student brigade of ours, and we basically served as train people, which is to say, like stewards. Because there was shortage of those during the summertime because everybody wanted to go south to the Black Sea and so forth, and people weren't flying. Everything in Russia was conducted by train.
Right. Was that a good job to get?
Well, it was difficult to get. It was not a job. It was relative. It was not much money. You didn't make money that way, but it was amazing to just go all across the Soviet Union. Not all across, because it's endless if you go east, but from north, Leningrad, to south, like Odessa or Kiev or Kishinev and other places like that. It was fascinating to see those kind of, and so it was hard to get. Yeah, it was a kind of matter of lottery or knowing somebody who was, in charge of that group of people. In our case, it was 20, I think. People, but that was only our university, and then there were just different departments in our university. And every basically institution of higher learning in Leningrad had brigades like that. Every college student was involved in doing something publicly useful in the summer, so that accounted for huge numbers, obviously, of kids doing. It's like It's like you were forced, organize the brigade to work at Starbucks in the summer, Yeah. And or doing something, or actually some elementary basic construction work.
Yeah.
Outside of Montreal, somewhere,
Yeah, building roads.
Building roads, building, some kind of constructions. I don't know, like cow sheds. I don't know, things like that. Grain elevators, whatever. Just yeah. And there was a group of students studying in Leningrad from Cuba, which of course was socialist country, right? And a great friend of the Soviet Union, occupied by the Soviet Union, essentially. And then there was a whole bunch of, there were maybe 15 of them, and they looked very, very foreign, of course, and they were just fascinating. I remember having a very, very long talk with one girl who was extremely pretty, Cuban girl, and I remember how then later everybody was drinking and everybody was dancing, and that was just totally not Russian, not Soviet-style merriment, then the kind of dancing just in the empty car, which reserved like diner. Which at night was, of course, free, and at night, every night, people were drinking there or dancing there or doing whatever. And so, yeah, that was probably the first time I had a serious conversation, like lengthy conversation with a real life foreigner. But then I first met an American when I was, or a person from capitalist country already when I was in my 20s. But that was already a very different matter, of course.
This train that you were on, it went, did you see the Black Sea? You got to see?
Yeah, well, of course. But I've been to Black Sea, to the Crimea, quite a few times with my parents, with my grandmother. It was a popular place. So yeah, I did go to Black Sea.
So you got to do family vacations
as a child, yeah. Yeah, although mainly it was just, like in Canada, there is cottage culture, and in Russia, there's dacha, essentially the same thing. You go like from 1 to 3 hours from the city, you have your own, but you have your little plot of land, which is not yours. It's owned by the government, but still. And dacha, which is a cottage, which is a summer kind of, construction, where some people lived whole year round, like my grandmother. She enjoyed that very much. And it was beautiful there. There was a lake, there was a forest, there were mushrooms in the forest, there was fish in the lake, there was,